let's say slowly sit down and start. I know that it's a bit of a bit of a madhouse today, so I'm not surprised if people are trickling in. That's but I hope, no, I'm not surprised, but I'm very glad that to have such a big audience, and I'd like to first of all just welcome everyone to this half an hour spiel or little introduction to philosophy at Trinity. Is that all right? Anybody who thinks he or she is in the wrong place, who absolutely must leave? Absolutely. Philosophy. Let's get out of here. Yes. Let me first say a word about myself, who is giving this introduction, half-hour introduction, to hopefully stimulating your interest in philosophy, but very much with the awareness that this is only a sort of opening move, an opening shot at some genuine stimulation. Please, unfortunately, the lights, there seems to be an incompatibility. Do you know the word incompatibility in philosophy? That's a big word, like logical incompatibility. In this case, I'm afraid it's not a logical incompatibility, it's a technical incompatibility, which seems to be the case of many things in Trinity. The logically compatible turns out to be technically incompatible. Between both having the recording of this, I don't know why we need a recording, obviously because I'm going to Hollywood, and the light, so we don't have light. So please, if I write it down, you won't be able to see it, but my email address is vpolitis, V-P-O-L-I-T-I-S. I say it again to write down, V-P-O-L-I-T-I-S. So politis is just like politics without a C, and V is the initial, no dot, and then it's at tcd.ie. So you're very welcome. Anybody who wants to send me a mail following up this meeting is very welcome to do so. For example, on things like how to become more familiar, how to familiarize oneself with philosophy. After all, philosophy is not a school subject, and many people may not be confident that they have a clear idea of what studying philosophy actually is. So that's an important part of today, just to make a mental note of this, how to familiarize oneself with philosophy. I'll come back to that later. So again, if you haven't noted the email address and you want to do so, just raise your hand and we can note it later. So I'm the head of department at the moment, only since this summer. The chair, Peter Simons, a very good and distinguished philosopher, has moved up in the world. He's now the head of school, and he has sort of sucked me up to being the head of department. I don't know whether I'm glad or not glad to tell you that in 6 months I'll be hitting 50, and I've been in Trinity now for exactly 20 years, and indeed in Ireland. I'm originally Greek, but I grew up in Denmark and then went to England to study for a number of years, in Germany as well. And then when I was 29, I got a job here, first as a 5-year job, and then one thing led to the other, with children and family and all that. And being stuck here in the philosophy department, which I actually am very, very glad. I was just spending this morning with a Greek friend and colleague of mine who made a point of seriously telling me just how glad I can be to be in Trinity and to be able to do what I want to do, and not being, say, in Greece. Or as he added, I hope I'm not offending anyone, or as he added, in Oxford. Anyway, my own interest is ancient philosophy, which in my case means especially Plato, also Aristotle and other people very much, pre-Socratics, Hellenistic philosophy. But Plato is at the moment my big passion, and has been for many years in philosophy. And so each of us in the philosophy department have his or her own commitments and passions in that discipline and that field, and we do things in very different ways. We concentrate on different areas of philosophy and have different approaches to philosophy. So my approach is, as you can see, to a large extent historical, but I would hope that I'm not merely a historian of philosophy. I very much think that ancient philosophy, Plato, Aristotle, is live. These people are not dead. They are kind of undead. Anyway, and I was struck just literally 2 days ago when I had an open door day where undergraduates could come, first-year undergraduates could come and say hello and spend half an hour talking about how we are doing and the essays and stuff like that. I was struck with a mature student who I noted in the big class, who came and told me that he'd been working. He's 59 and he'd been working many years in electronics, in phones in particular, and suddenly he was made redundant, and he also realized that he'd had enough. And then I asked him, yes, but that's fine, but how do you go from there to studying simply philosophy? He's a pure philosophy student. And he said, well, you know, I just started thinking big time, and that brought me to Trinity philosophy. So if you start thinking big time, this is where you end up. Or at least that's the danger. This morning I was spending, and actually I'm just taking this half an hour out in the Plato Center. It's a center where we have a big library, and many people work on Plato and related issues, where a scholar on Plato and later philosophy is giving us a workshop over 2 days on whether the early Christians could be genuine philosophers, whether they were just a mad cult with superstitions and stuff like that, or whether they, as they actually themselves aspired to, could be genuine, rigorous, systematic philosophers who defend their views in a way that can engage not just with other early Christians, but with anyone, people who are dead set against Christianity, like, for example, Stoics or Epicureans or even Platonists. So that's, I think, something that is just as relevant today, that philosophy tries to not necessarily break out of everything traditional and historical, but to raise this to a level where the discussion, the debate, the argument is rigorous and open to everyone, intelligible potentially to everyone who is prepared and interesting to think. So in this way, I think that Wittgenstein, a famous 20th century philosopher, Wittgenstein, in fact, he was born in the 19th century, I think it's 1899, and died in 1952. In this sense, Wittgenstein was right when he said that what distinguishes a philosopher from other thinkers, from other, say, scientists or just intellectuals, is that he doesn't belong to any community of thought. In German, the word community is Gemeinde, and Gemeinde can also mean parish. So a philosopher is not arguing from some vested interest or some particular perspective or some particular axe to grind or even some general commitment to science. He's even above that. He can say, you know, is science a basic commitment? Certainly he may say yes, but is it the only basic or the highest commitment in intellectual life? And he or she looks at these questions in an open and searching way. So what's distinctive of philosophy is not so much doctrines or views or conclusions or even arguments. Arguments are very important, but it's more the search, the search, the inquiry and search. I take to be the same concept. And what is it that motivates a search? What is it that sets a search in motion? Well, it's not the conclusion, because you may not be confident that you found the conclusion. Philosophers are not always confident. They shouldn't be confident about that. And neither is it, strictly speaking, an argument, because an argument presupposes you've already found the conclusion, or at least the conclusion that you want to defend. You found what it is you want to defend, and you've also found that that's what you want to defend. Whereas a search is set in motion by question. So philosophy is really, at the heart of philosophy, we have the questions, and these questions set in motion these searches or inquiries, and then we have something we can call a distinctively philosophical inquiry or search set in motion by a distinctively philosophical question. And it's not easy to decide what makes a question distinctively philosophical. So a very central part of the study of philosophy is learning to question, both in the sense of learning to criticize, but also learning to formulate, articulate, identify, get involved in, get engaged with questions, and learning the skill, which is a skill of trying to answer, searching for an answer, which of course is a highly argumentative skill, a skill at which, in the center of which we have arguments. So this is really very much my sort of bottom line about what philosophy is, and I think that certainly all my colleagues, or certainly most of them, would be very happy with what I say about philosophy so far. I'm trying to be not just from my own perspective, but to speak on behalf of the department as a whole, even though, as I said, the department is highly varied in its interest and even in its approaches to philosophy. One thing you'll find about philosophy is that philosophers do not generally agree about what is the right approach within the subject. I mean, mathematicians, I guess, I may be wrong, by and large agree about how to study mathematics, but philosophers don't necessarily agree on that. So we have a sort of varied approaches to philosophy, but we have certain overall commitments and agreements on what philosophy is and how to go about studying it. Now, let me just say a little bit about sort of just information, basic information about the structure of the course. You know that it's a 4-year degree, but again, if I had the blackboard, if you imagine you draw 4 horizontal lines, first year, second year, third year, fourth year, you need to draw a line in the middle after the first 2 years, because the first 2 years are a kind of a learning period in the sense of learning to study the damn thing, because what you are doing doesn't count towards your degree in terms of marks and so on. So you really have 2 years to get to know the ropes, as I think the idiom is. And then in the third and fourth year, you have to be aware that everything that you submit, every mark that you get is part of your final degree. But at that point, you have had a good preparation and also to find what is it that you're particularly interested in philosophy. What do you want to avoid? What do you want to definitely to concentrate on, and other things you may not be so keen on, and which people take in the philosophy department and of course in the study of philosophy, the philosophers you study are the ones you want to focus on. You have a long 2 years to really familiarize yourself with that. So we have that division. We also have 3 different ways of studying philosophy. That's a different sort of dimension. One is students who study just philosophy, nothing else. They are at the moment in the first year, there are 25 such students. I think we started off with 19 in September, and then since then there have been 6 people have transferred to single honors philosophy, as it's called. So 25 students. That means that you get twice as many courses as the other students. Twice as many courses, and it also means in half of those courses, you are just on your own, just those 25, not with a big class. Then you can study philosophy in combination with one other subject. That's called a two-subject moderatorship, or TSM. And I won't go through them, but you will find in the leaflet there are lots of combinations, depending on what your interest is and where you hope to go. We could add further combinations. I've noticed for years now that there is no combination called philosophy and physics, which is a bit puzzling. There is philosophy and mathematics, but we haven't been able to. Anyway, there is philosophy and languages, philosophy and religions, philosophy and mathematics, philosophy and this, that, and the other. So that's another way. There you get half the courses of the other people. In fact, you get 2 courses in the first year, 2 courses in the second year that last the whole year. And then finally, you can study philosophy in that one combination, which is called PPES, Philosophy, Politics, Economics, and Sociology. Because the philosophy department, or also because the philosophy department is part of the School of Political Science, Economics, Sociology, and Philosophy, we have this degree, which is sort of similar to the well-known PPE in Britain, Philosophy, Politics, and Economics, and we call it PPES because there's also sociology. And there you start with all 4 subjects, and then you sort of narrow it down. At the final year, you can have 1 or 2 subjects, and that's how you proceed. Now, that is something you can also read up, so let me not belabor you with this. I just want to say that our approach to these, to all the categories of students, our aim when teaching all categories of students is to combine various approaches to philosophy in a way that should be good both for your study of philosophy, but also, of course, for your intellectual education through that study, because, of course, very few of those who study philosophy go on to graduate studies in philosophy, and even fewer to become professional philosophers, academic philosophers. But philosophy actually, that is something I can say more about, but is a very good subject also with regard to the success of what our graduates do afterwards. What people who have graduated in philosophy either on its own or with another subject generally have a very good success rate in doing something afterwards. It can be finding a job. It can also be doing something more career-oriented. So one of my good friends finished in '98 philosophy and French, TSM philosophy of French, then studied law, and now is in the European Court and is also a barrister. And every time we talk, we immediately go back to philosophical arguments. You know, this case, he is actually the person who from Ireland brought this case to the European Union that this mechanism was illegal within the remit of the EU, and as you know, he failed to persuade them. You heard this a couple of days ago. I have to call him and commiserate, but he wasn't very optimistic. They are not going to admit that this whole thing is illegal on their own principles. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Now, these various approaches are basically threefold: a historical dimension to the approach, where we draw on the great philosophers. I've mentioned Plato. How can I not mention Descartes or Russell or Kant or Aquinas or Spinoza or Leibniz or Wittgenstein, and really think about philosophical issues by using these great texts that really focus the mind and really exercises one in the best possible way. So there's the historical dimension, there's the thematic dimension, the dimension that tries to formulate themes, to identify themes, and to formulate questions. Formulate is not just a matter of writing it, but to write it, to articulate it in such a way that it really is a question that grips one and gets one going, sets one off, pulls one in opposite directions. You know, famously, Plato asked, "Can virtue be taught?" You go to Trinity, you pay lots of money, you learn something, but do you become better? Not better at something, but just better people. Plato said, well, that's a real question. Some will say, you can teach that kind of thing. Others would say you can't. And this is a hard choice. I mean, how are parents supposed to, some of you will be parents, but most of you will eventually be parents. Shall we give up on that? Trying to teach the young not just to play the flute, that's Plato's example, but also just to be good people, good citizens. So to articulate questions, the thematic dimension of the approach, and finally the text-based part of the approach, which is very connected to the historical part of the approach. So I've said something about myself and the department, about some information and about our mission, how we go about the subject, the structure of the course, the members of the department. I've just touched on the topic of why study philosophy. Why study philosophy? That is to say, through this emphasis on philosophy as the training in asking questions, in questioning and asking questions that are sufficiently basic and general and if you like, deep and profound and sort of don't take much for granted. Ideally, take nothing for granted. Of course, we can take lots of things for granted, and we can ask a question, when is the bus coming? Is the bus coming before 3 or after 3? It's not a philosophical question. Why is it not a philosophical question? Well, it's kind of obvious, but I mean, it's a good question. Why is it not a philosophical question? Why not have the philosophy of traffic? You can just see those people in the European, the foundation, the European Foundation down in wherever it is, South Dublin, there in Loughlinstown or wherever, saying, now we can fund it. We can fund the philosophy of traffic. Well, actually, it's not a bad idea, because imagine what you have to presuppose to be able to ask the question, is the bus coming before or after 3? You basically have to presuppose a civil society where things are predictable. Now, you may think, well, come on. I mean, if we can't presuppose this, what the hell are we supposed to presuppose? But don't be so sure. Don't be so sure. Remember, look at me. I'm from Greece. My mother rang me yesterday and said she was going to some kind of to get some official paper to get some extra 10 euro a month or whatever for something, and she said, look, my son, you can be glad you're not here. So civil society is not something we can take entirely for granted, and this is becoming quite apparent to us these days. So before you know it, such a rather pedestrian, sorry, I didn't mean the pun. So the pedestrian question is whether the bus is before or after 3 can reveal philosophical dimensions, and then you can try to articulate those. And this hopefully is not of purely academic interest. This hopefully is not of purely academic interest. I'm afraid that philosophy is, even in my sort of lifetime, I mean, since I was studying philosophy, which is, let's say, 30 years ago, I started studying in 1982, so it's exactly 30 years ago. Philosophy has become very professionalized, I would say excessively professionalized, excessively academic. If you look up the journals, you will find a very often, not always, often a very narrow approach. I remember, here's an anecdote, I remember sitting some years ago next to a speaker who visited us in the philosophy department, and I asked, as one does, you don't know what do you ask a speaker who's sitting next to you? You can't start by asking, do you have a wife or are you divorced? You don't ask that. So you usually ask, what are you working on? What are you working on, and what's your area of? And he said, the semantics of the adverb. Okay. But I think we don't have to go there straight away. If you become graduate students in philosophy and you want to take up something as narrow as that, good luck to you. But to begin with, we have a more Catholic, in the sense of the Greek word katholikos, sort of an all-encompassing and broad approach that also bears in mind, keeps in mind the current relevance of this subject. Of course, ancient philosophy is particularly interesting and important here because the ancient philosophers could go into abstruse details as subtly as any expert on the semantic of adverbs. However, they still had in their minds the firm commitment to philosophy being of some general value for life, for living one's life, both personally, they said, both the personal life, the private personal life, and public life. So we try to keep that in mind, and by using some of the great old philosophers, they needn't be that old, but who have this broad conception, we can work on this. And finally, I like to emphasize the dialectical dimension of philosophy. Dialectic, of course, comes from the Greek word dialegesthai, which basically means to have an argument. Well, that's not what it means. It means discussion. But it's not some term of art. It's not a technical term. By discussion, I mean philosophy in action. Philosophy in action involving more than one person sitting in the library alone with himself or herself. It involves doing things with others in groups. And what do you do when you're in a group and you have something philosophical like a question and a text? You immediately start discussing. And we have lots and lots of discussion in the philosophy department at all kinds of levels. We have the Metaphysical Society, which is extremely active, run by students, bringing in visiting speakers, both professional philosophers, public figures, scientists, and they're very, very active. We have a colloquium of staff. We have informal discussion groups. We have the Plato Center where we organize lots of discussions. I just came from one and going back to one now. So these are the sort of the things that came to my mind. Why study philosophy? Learning this skill of questioning, of articulating important and basic questions. Secondly, the relevance to today. Thirdly, the reliance on great thinkers from the past. And finally, just lots and lots of discussion. Now, I did say to myself when I was just jotting some things down for what I would do, I should give you an example of a philosophical question. But then I couldn't think of one. I could think of many examples, but I give you this example, which is, of course, a little tortuous, but it's actually not a bad one if you think about it. Is it obvious what is obvious? That, in my book, is an important philosophical question, or you might put it in slightly more formal terms. Is it evident what is evident? So, philosophers are looking for, when you have a philosophical argument, the argument should better start. If it's a good argument, it should start off with premises that are evident or even self-evident rather than disputable. But is it that clear what is disputable and what is indisputable? Does that not depend on who one is and one's background and stuff? My God. Shall we spend the afternoon on this? Would you like to stay? Okay. The last thing I want to say is practical. I don't have time to say very much. I really encourage you, if you feel like it, to send me an email, and I can prepare something that I can simply attach. Then if I get flooded with emails, I don't have to answer individually. How does one familiarize oneself with philosophy? Suppose you've heard what I've said now, you've heard some other things, but you are not really sure about what philosophy is. So do mail me about that. I don't at the moment have in my mind a good introduction to philosophy, and I would warn you, if I may do that kind of thing. Don't just go and buy an introduction to philosophy, because it may be a bad one. There are many bad introductions to philosophy, and it's worse than anything. There are some good ones, but I can't immediately think of one. So that's what I'm going to find out in the next couple of days. But you can't go wrong if you go to one of the great texts. Take a Platonic dialogue, a dialogue of Plato's, the Gorgias, for example, or the Protagoras. Or take the meditations of Descartes meditations. Or take Russell's The Problems of Philosophy. These are sort of old chestnuts, but that's why they're still there, because they're old chestnuts. You can't go wrong there. You'll get something that is of quality, and okay, it may be hard, but it doesn't let you down, and if you give it some effort, it will certainly repay it. And that's the last thing I have to say. And I realize that half an hour is very, very short. Thank you.